have a lack of affordable housing. Some areas may feel that the development hasn't matched the character of the area or hasn't reflected the design of the area. And some areas might desperately need a new community centre and want to support development which delivers that. So neighbourhood plans can help tackle all of these and many more problems. Shall I go to the next slide? So how can a neighbourhood plan be successful in adding value? Well, first, I think it's already been touched on, but it's important to mention that without a neighbourhood plan, planning decisions in your local area are decided based on the information that's in the local plan or within national policies such as the NPPF. So obviously at the moment in South Oxfordshire, that's the South Oxfordshire local plan, and in Vale of Whitehorse, that's the Vale of Whitehorse local plan, and both of those councils are working together on a new joint local plan. But with a neighbourhood plan, you can add that local detail to those local planning policies. And it just adds another step to that process for when decisions come in for them to be considered against. So as Ricardo's already mentioned, and it's already been discussed, neighbourhood plan policies do hold the same weight as those local plan policies. And the development management team at the councils are required to consider them and give regard to them when an application comes in. So as such, by creating a neighbourhood plan, local communities can utilise their local knowledge to fill in any gaps where there may be in the local plan policies, especially in terms of detail. So local plan policy is going to be looking, at the kind of the needs and opportunities of the district as a whole, whereas a neighbourhood plan can sort of slot in and provide that information at a much more local level. So to illustrate how that might work in progress, on the right here, we've got a sort of example village, a place that at the moment doesn't have a neighbourhood plan, and they are considering having one, and they're thinking about how that might impact their local area. So I think I've gone for too many slides. So first, it's important to consider what information is already available. So this is the information that's available in this area through the local plan and through national policy. So it's already been identified. There's an area that's at risk of flooding, that's shown in blue. There's a couple of designated heritage assets that are shown with stars. There's a biodiversity area or 2 biodiversity areas in green, and there's a conservation area. So these are the things that have already been identified, mainly through the local plan, and the community already has the protection from those. But they have also identified a number of issues and opportunities that are specific to the village. So the first one they've identified is that recent development hasn't always been built in the areas the communities would like or in the design that they would like. They're concerned that green spaces are being built on. They're worried about the impact of development on the views of the village from the south. There are a number of unlisted heritage structures, so not those ones of stars, that the community want to protect. They're concerned that new development might exacerbate flooding issues in that area of flood risk, and they're worried about the impact of new buildings on the environment. So I know there's quite a few of you here tonight who have done a neighbourhood plan before, or even if you haven't and you think you've got some ideas, I'm going to open it up to you and ask you to maybe provide some ideas for policies that this community could incorporate in order to maybe tackle some of these issues or try and resolve them. So if you have got any ideas, please feel free to stick your hand up, or if you'd rather type it in the chat, go ahead, and I'll give you all a minute or two to do that. And whilst you are doing that, if you haven't got a neighbourhood plan or you're thinking about reviewing it, maybe also think about some issues and opportunities in your area that you would also like to see addressed, maybe something that's not on this list as well. Just give you a moment.
So feel free to use either hands up and speak up and make suggestions, or to type on the chat. Entirely up to you.
You'll have to excuse me, my voice is going a little bit, but I'll try and carry on. Yeah, so I mean, if you haven't got any ideas, then I can touch on some, but I can't see any coming through on the chat, but that my chat doesn't seem to be working, I don't think, but that's all right. Well, no worries. I can move on if no one has any ideas. Just on to the next slide.
Tom, that one has come through, and it's to protect local green spaces and important views.
Yes, that's both really good examples, and they are both ones that I will touch on in a second. Yeah, sorry. So the community, one thing that the first thing that we always really do recommend to groups to do is to go and look at examples in made neighbourhood plans, because they are really the best resource for seeing what has already been done and getting a and yeah, I think there's Jonathan as well. Yeah, avoiding system and coalescence as well. That's something else I'll touch on as well. So for this example village, they've identified the issues and opportunities that they have, and now and looked for a couple of examples. I'm seeing everyone come in. So yeah, so another example of a flood mitigation policy there as well. I'll touch on that as well. So some neighbourhood plans choose to include housing allocations and policies on affordable housing. So I've got some examples here. The Benson neighbourhood plan actually chose to allocate a substantial amount of additional housing through their plan. And that was largely in order to help facilitate a new relief road to the north of the village. So that's a really good example of how you can utilise one policy, such as an allocation, to bring about another benefit, which for the Benson's case was in infrastructure matter and wanted to relieve traffic congestion through the heart of the village. Meanwhile, Goring undertook a housing needs assessment, and that helped them identify that there was a need for affordable housing in the village. And so they produced a policy that aimed to tackle that issue. As already mentioned, neighbourhood plans also have the ability to identify important local green spaces. And this is actually one of the most popular types of policies that we see. And a designated local green space gives the land that it's designated to the same protection as greenbelt. So it's a very, very strong policy. There are a few sort of specifications and requirements that land has to have. So it needs to be in reasonable close proximity to the community it serves. It needs to be demonstrably special, for example, through its beauty, heritage, recreational value, example. And it needs to be local in character and not an extensive tract of land. But yeah, we've seen lots of groups identify a variety of sites, some very small areas, some larger ones, some parks, and some just grass verges. If they're able to demonstrate that it meets those criteria, that has been done. So yeah, like I said, they've been very, very popular. We've got a couple of examples here, Wallingford and Wantage. They're just two recent examples, but we've got many across both districts. It was also mentioned was views. So neighbourhood plans are able to identify there is an important view that they want to see being preserved or maintained. These views are from publicly accessible vantage points, so roads or footpaths. And basically what it sets out is that a development within that viewpoint needs to recognise and take account of the view in their design and sort of reflects it. So it's not a sort of blanket ban on developments that would block those views entirely, but more about recognising and not having an acceptable impact on those views. So a couple of examples there are East Challow and Steventon that both had key view policies in their plans. And many plans also like to touch on conservation, heritage and character. So for example, the Cumnor neighbourhood plan identified several local buildings as non-designated heritage assets. So those were buildings that weren't listed, but that they wanted to give protection to and recognise, and they were able to do that. And actually in the case of Cumnor, and in any plan in Vale of Whitehorse could do the same as well, in the Vale local plan, there is a specific reference to what should happen with non-designated heritage assets, but it doesn't actually set out where these assets are located. So neighbourhood plans such as Cumnor can identify where those assets are and then say they should be protected in line with the policy in the local plan. So that's a good bit of cooperation between those two plans there. The West Hanley neighbourhood plan produced a character assessment as part of their evidence base, which supported a policy in the plan that looked to make sure that all development that came forward reflected the character of the area as set out in the character assessment. And that, again, is something we see a lot of groups wanting to do. And I'll touch a bit more on character and design as well coming up. Um, go to the next slide, please. Another thing that groups can do is tackle climate change. So one such way is through trying to mitigate against the impacts of climate change, or impacts on climate change. An example for that is the Woodcote Review, which supported proposals for solar energy arrays, and the Berensfield Plan, which supported community-led renewable energy generation. Neighbourhood plans can also develop policies which try to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So, for example, the joint Henley and Harpston Review required all development proposals to consider a fabric-first approach in their design, and the Tame Review, along with lots of other plans, have also included matters addressing SUDs, or sustainable drainage systems. And that's another very popular topic as well, and that's in order to address flooding issues. So I'm now going to touch on a couple of new matters, or kind of expanded and changed matters through the recent or the ongoing consultation on the NPPF. And one of those is to do with settlements. So the proposals, the consultation on the NPPF proposes a new definition for settlements. And it defines that settlements should be or are cities, towns, villages, and other predominantly built up areas. They are areas defined as a settlement in the development plan, and they are areas defined by settlement boundaries. It also sets out that they shouldn't be considered settlements, shouldn't be hamlets or scattered groups of houses outside of those predominantly built up areas, unless specifically set out somewhere else. The proposals also include a new policy, which sets out that development proposals within settlements should be approved unless the benefits of doing so would be substantially outweighed by any adverse effects, and another policy which sets out that only certain forms of development should be approved outside settlements, and that these should be approved unless the benefits of doing so would be substantially outweighed by any adverse effects. And there is a list provided in the proposed NPPF which sets out what those forms of development might be. So as you can see, these proposed changes really do demonstrate that the government is wanting to place an increased emphasis on development within settlements, and explicitly supporting development in these locations, and being a bit more firmer on development outside of those locations. So in terms of how neighbourhood plans can respond to that, sorry, I've gone too far. One way could be through the identification of settlement boundaries. I think that was something else that was mentioned, or settlement coalescence and settlement boundaries kind of fall into that as well. And as you can see on this slide, this is an example, an array of different neighbourhood plans across Southern Vale that have introduced settlement boundaries. So they are very popular in both districts. And settlement boundaries are usually used to define the built-up limits or built limits of a village or town, and clearly distinguish between what is the built-up area of the settlement and the surrounding open countryside. And that may mean that there are areas which are considered to be part of the sort of village, but aren't within the settlement boundary, such as a scattering of houses a sort of short distance away from the village, or something separated by a large open area. And this matches up actually with what the government is proposing to define as settlements, and explicitly excluding those areas that are scattered or further away from the main element of the settlement. And a settlement boundary in a main neighbourhood plan can be used to inform the decisions on the location and scale of development, and they act as a reference point for determining where certain types of development may be supported. So again, linking back to what the NPPF is proposing. So some examples of where settlement boundaries have been used, like I said on the last slide, we've had many, but two specific examples are East Hanley and Lewknor. And I've drawn these two out mainly just because they include a very good methodology in their evidence base as to why specifically the boundary was drawn where it was. And they consider certain areas why they were excluded, talk about where the curtilages of certain buildings are, and either including those or not including those, and giving the reasons as to why. And my colleague Robin will shortly be touching on the guides and templates that we are producing and making available for groups in both South Oxfordshire and the Vale of White Horse. And one of those guides is on settlement boundaries, and that document includes a section on how to produce a successful and sound settlement boundary methodology, as well as advice on policy wording and conformity with local and national policy. And before I move on, I would like to caveat that obviously I've talked specifically about settlement boundaries here in response to that those proposed changes in the NPPF. And it's important to say that the NPPF is obviously proposing a more streamlined approach to the way settlements are considered. And there's a role to play for both the district council and neighbourhood plans in adding detail to that. But that could change, and the way that the NPPF is proposing the specific settlement definition and stuff could change. And it's important to say that settlement boundaries are not a requirement, and we have seen groups sort of tackle the issue of identifying where their settlement is in different ways. And there may be other ways that we're able to think of as well as we sort of move on and see how the NPPF goes as well. So yeah, just to say that they're not a requirement, but they are a method that lots of groups have chosen to take to add that local specificity. Yeah, that's going to move on. So another area that is receiving additional attention in the proposed NPPF changes is to do with density. So again, the proposed consultation or the ongoing consultation on the NPPF proposes a new policy which sets out that development proposals for residential and mixed-use development within settlements should contribute to an increase in the density of the area in which they are situated. And then it also sets out that the existing character of an area should be taken into account, but should not preclude development which makes the most of an area's potential. So again, this is a clear indication that the government wants to see an uptick in density in all settlements. And the wording of this policy does indicate that there is still an avenue for influencing how that should come forward by making being aware of the character of an area, but it does say that that shouldn't preclude the development. So again, we should actually, before I do that, before I get on to talking about how neighbourhood plans can respond to this, I thought it'd be worth just looking at this diagram that's included in the National Model Design Code, which is a document produced by the government, and it's on their website, and I provided a link for it there below. And it's a very interesting document if you are thinking about doing a design code, and I'll get on to that in a second. It's a very useful document to take a look at. But it includes this image which sets out sort of different levels of density from urban neighbourhoods through to rural settlements. And I really want just to flag this because I think when you hear about an uptick in density, you might think that it's going to require you to jump straight from a rural settlement or a village all the way up to an urban neighbourhood. But really, there's lots of different steps in there. And this obviously isn't showing the whole picture as well. Then there'll be steps in between all of these steps. And you might be looking at just a few more houses per hectare rather than 60 to 120 dwellings per hectare when you're talking about uptick. So the right answer in terms of what is an appropriate density will vary from place to place. And so because of that, it's then really important to make sure that you're capturing what the current character of your area is and that any new density and any uptick in density continues to reflect that character. So I will now touch on how you can do that. And one of the most popular ways that communities have touched on character in the past, and then as Ricardo was saying, not going all the way back to the start of neighbourhood planning, but at least in the recent past, is through design codes. So design codes can sit within or alongside your neighbourhood plan. And they range from, in Southern Vale, they range from less detailed, more focused codes to very comprehensive and ranging ones. But ultimately, they all generally contain a sort of reflection of the existing character of an area and then set out illustrated, detailed principles for how development in the future should come forward and how it should reflect that existing character. So the requirement for neighbourhood plan design codes is that they have to have regard to the codes that have been adopted by the local planning authority. So for Southern Vale, that is the joint Southern Vale design guide, and that's to avoid any conflicting or overlapping requirements. But what neighbourhood plan design codes can do is, again, add a lot of that local specificity and a lot of local detail that the joint local design guide just won't have in terms of what the specific character of your area is and how development should respond to that. So we've got quite a lot of design codes across Southern Vale, but again, I've drawn out two here in Wheatley and Sutton Courtenay. And the reason I've drawn these two out is because they both talk about density already in their design codes. So I'm going to look at the Sutton Courtenay design code specifically, and they include this section, which on the left here includes a map which looks at the different densities of certain areas by calculating the number of dwellings per hectare, and also talks about the plot ratio, which is really just the gross floor area of a building divided by the area of the plot. And I think this map is really interesting because there's an area, it's got a sort of a black border around it and a purple star. That's the highest density part of the village. And that is actually a short run of very characterful historic terraces which clocks in at about 30 to 35 hectares per dwelling. So perhaps counterintuitively, the highest density area of the village is one of the oldest parts of it. And some of the newer areas of the village are more like 5 to 20 dwellings per hectare. So it's just kind of example that maybe when you think about high density, it's not always the areas you're thinking about are high density. The Sutton Corney Design Code then on the right here includes this section which sets out that the density of any new development should be determined by considering the density of neighbouring sites in addition to the ratio of built form to plot size. So this is a sort of example of what we might see neighbourhood plans doing in order to respond to this new policy in the NPPF if it does come forward in that manner, in terms of obviously reflecting that there needs to be an uptick in density, but making sure that that does come forward in a way that still reflects the character of the local area. And again, we are producing a guide which discusses the production of design codes, which Robin will be touching on shortly. Slide. Ooh. Yeah, let's go to that. So going back to our example village, they have now managed to produce their neighbourhood plan and have it made successfully. And they've managed to include a lot more policies that have given a lot more local detail to their area. So we can see on the right there in the legend and obviously on the map as well, they had the first four things that were already identified through the local plan. But they've now included a housing allocation in the north. They've identified some local green spaces and given those spaces the protection, the same protection as Greenbelt. They've identified some key views from the elevated gardens to the south. They've also identified a couple of character areas and set out the densities within each of those character areas. They've identified some locally listed buildings. They've identified a site for solar, and they've also drawn a settlement boundary as well. And as you can see, it excludes that area. I think it's Wendy Street up in the top left as well, because they consider that to be an isolated hamlet away from the main built-up area of the village as well. So as you can see, the production of the neighbourhood plan has added a lot more local detail than what was previously available. The final bit I'm going to touch on is how your neighbourhood plan can stay up to date. So obviously this community has had their neighbourhood plan made, they've had the policies adopted, and now they want to make sure that they continue to remain effective long into the future. So I know Ricardo's already touched on this, and it's a question that's come up a couple of times. But yeah, I think it's important to stress that there isn't a requirement to update your neighbourhood plan. However, planning doesn't stay still, and there may be reasons that your planning policies do go out of date. So, for example, if a new local plan is adopted, which has policies that conflict with any specific policy in your neighbourhood plan, that new policy takes precedence. But that does only apply to where there is a direct conflict. So if you have policies in your neighbourhood plan that don't conflict with any policies in the new local plan, then they will continue to apply. And it was also touched on where a policy or where a neighbourhood plan has been enforced for quite a long period of time. Other material considerations may be given greater weight in planning decisions as the evidence base for the neighbourhood plan becomes less robust. So it is always important to check how effective your policies are being in achieving your vision and objectives, especially in light of changes to local and national policy. And you should try and stay engaged with the district council, even after your plan is made, to discuss any areas you identify where there could be an enhancement to your policies or where your current policies aren't having the desired effect. If you do decide that your neighbourhood plan needs to be reviewed, it's important to be aware that there are 3 different types of modifications that can be made to a plan, and they have slightly different processes in how those are done. Ooh, okay, click forward twice again. So the first form of modification that can be made to a neighbourhood plan is a minor or non-material modification. And what that means basically is that it's a modification that doesn't materially affect the policies in the plan. That is, it doesn't add or change or delete or anything, any of the policies in the plan. This is generally something that's reserved for the correction of an error or the updating of a fact, such as maybe your bus has stopped serving and you want to take that out of your plan. These sort of modifications don't require an examination or a referendum, and they can be done at any time. They're very easy to do. You just need to let us know that you want to do that sort of modification, and we can generally do that very quickly. The next sort of modification is a little bit more complex. This is a material modification which doesn't change the nature of the plan. So these soil modifications do affect the policies in the plan. They are material modifications. But they might be something like adding additional detail to a policy, such as adding a design code to a design policy. Sorry, excuse me. And these soil modifications require examination, but not a referendum. Sorry. The final soil modification is a sorry, my voice really going. Sorry, is a material modification which does change the nature of the plan. These are generally such as the allocating a new site for development, or another sort of major change to the plan. And these soil modifications would require an examination and a referendum. You also have the opportunity to review the area covered by your neighbourhood plan if you determine that the area covered by the original one is no longer appropriate. Sorry. That's really bad. But similarly to the local plan, when we're talking about the local government review, the policies in the May plan will continue to apply to the area that the original neighbourhood plan was designated for, and a new neighbourhood plan, and those policies would continue to apply until that original plan was revoked or replaced, and the new area that you change wouldn't have policies apply to that whole area until a new plan is brought forward. So the original plan will continue to apply to the original area until it's replaced. And again, the district council is able to support you through any of these processes and give you advice on which type of modification and which type of process your plan might go through, depending on the modifications that you're proposing. Very quickly then, looking at the benefits of neighbourhood plans. So I've touched on most of these already, but they allow you to introduce locally specific policies. They enable you to have meaningful community involvement in planning decisions. And then going around here, there's lots of policies that you could introduce and ones that I've touched on. But yeah, you can protect important views. You can maintain and strengthen local character. You can support and protect community facilities. You can improve infrastructure and the public realm. You can protect local green spaces. Sorry. And you can have greater control over the design of a development. So just in concluding thoughts, really stress the neighbourhood plans continue to have an important role in the planning system. They can add value through locally specific policies, and they can stay up to date by being reviewed when necessary as well. So sorry that my throat has failed me today, but I hope that all made sense. And obviously, if you have got any questions, then please let us know.
Thank you, Tom. You have made it through to the end of the presentation.